Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So for this video, I'm going to respond to Dr. Umar Johnson's statement about what's happening in Gaza and Israel. So here's what Dr. Umar Johnson said. He said, "You can stop asking my opinion on the war in the Middle East. We have a war against Black people right here in the United States. My energy and attention are on my own people. We have an impending war between the French and our African family back home in the motherland. Have either side in this conflict ever stood with Black people against police brutality, mass incarceration, or systemic injustice? No, they haven't. Although I wish no harm on anyone, and I hope that a speedy resolution can be reached to help prevent further bloodshed, my priority is the liberation of African people. My priority is Black people. I'm amazed how interested Black people become when other races are faced with genocide, but do next to nothing to help their own people faced with similar circumstances." So here's what I have to say about this. First of all, I agree with some of the points that he said, but I adamantly disagree with others. First of all, I believe that Black people are my priority as well. But that doesn't mean that I cannot speak out against injustice that I see in other parts of the world. His whole statement is based on a false dichotomy, as if you have one choice or the other. The fact of the matter is, you can be concerned about the plight of Black people. You can be actively engaged and involved in the fight against injustice right here in America and colonialism in Africa, while at the same time, you can speak out against injustice that is happening around the world, including in Gaza and Israel. So it's not like you can only speak on one issue or you can only focus on one issue at a time. So I think that is, again, a false dichotomy. It's a false choice. We don't have to limit ourselves to just speaking about Black issues. And the other point is this, he says that, neither side in this conflict has ever stood with Black people against police brutality, mass incarceration, or systemic injustice. And the fact of the matter is, that's just an outright falsehood. The truth of the matter is that during apartheid, when our brothers and sisters on the African continent were subjected to intense discrimination, settler colonialism, it was the PLO that was in alignment with the anti-apartheid movement. It was the PLO that supported the anti-apartheid movement. So let's understand this. They were in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in South Africa who were fighting against apartheid. And the fact of the matter is, the PLO had ties to revolutionary movements right here in America. They had ties to the Black Panther Party. And I'm going to go into that a little bit in more detail in a second. I just think that that's false. And then, you have the example of the PLO's support of the anti-apartheid movement, and you have modern day examples of Palestinians marching in the streets of Palestine against police brutality here in America. Using the slogans of the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, painting murals dedicated to the memory of George Floyd. So we need to stop with these false narratives. And one of the things that has to be said is that our revolutionary ancestors understood the importance of coalitions. They understood the importance of oppressed people around the world uniting. And that's why you have Brother Malcolm X speaking out in support of the Palestinian people. And what I'll do is I will put the sources to this information in the description box to this video so that you can read these sources for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Read the information for yourself. So you had Brother Malcolm X meeting with PLO members, speaking out in support of the Palestinian people. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple of quotes from a couple of articles that I came across that address this issue of solidarity. So with respect to Malcolm X wrote a letter in the Egyptian Gazette in which he declared his quote-unquote staunch support for the Palestinian struggle, and where he equated Zionism with colonialism, urging African leaders to support the Palestinian quest for freedom. So Brother Malcolm X understood the importance of being in solidarity with other oppressed people around the world. And then there are statements that I want to read from another article. It includes statements made by Huey P. Newton, and also information about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and their solidarity with the Palestinian people. Huey P. Newton, one of the co-founders of the Black Panther Party, wrote this. He said, Israel was created by Western imperialism and is maintained by Western firepower. And he also talked about how neither Zionism nor Americanism can escape the wrath of these anti-colonialist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist Black Panthers. And it goes on and says more information. Again, I will include this source in the description box to this video. This article also points out how the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began to transform itself from a liberal civil rights organization to a radical Black nationalist organization. And it took a bold position in support of Palestine. And in a statement co-written by Stokely Carmichael, who would later be known as Kwame Ture, and he's known for the slogan Black Power. He made statements in support of the Palestinian people. And that statement that I had mentioned earlier was co-written by him. And as a result of that, after they issued that statement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee lost a lot of money. They lost a lot of their sponsorship because of their controversial statement about Palestine. So again, Dr. Umar Johnson's statement about Palestinians and, never being concerned or about the plight of Black people is just straight up false. It's straight up false. I provided the example of the PLO supporting the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. I talked about the connections between the Palestinians and the civil rights movement, in terms of Black organizations supporting the Palestinian people and the Palestinian people supporting those organizations as well. And again, I will post a link or links in the description box to this video so you can read this content for yourself. Dr. Umar Johnson is simply wrong on that issue. And this just brings me to another point. I told you about these real revolutionaries, understanding the importance of coalitions, understanding the importance of being in solidarity with other groups, around the world, other groups of oppressed people around the world. And the truth of the matter is, we have a whole new generation of, these Black power entertainers. These people, and I'm just going to stray for a moment away from the core argument that I'm making here to just make some other commentary. The fact of the matter is, we have a generation where you have these social media influencers who are not real, actual leaders. They don't actually lead organizations. These individuals are entertainers. They are on social media entertaining you instead of actually leading and educating the masses of the people. The fact of the matter is, your Dr. Umar Johnsons and your Tariq Nasheeds, they are not a part of any real organizations that are actually doing work in our communities. So you have to make a distinction between those people and those who are actually doing the work. And as much as you have to say about, Black Lives Matter, and certain leaders that have created that slogan, the fact of the matter is, Black Lives Matter is not just those people that are out front that everybody knows about. It's like masses of people in different cities around the country actually on the ground doing the work, actually out in the streets protesting and marching. They are not sitting on YouTube just talking about things. They are actually putting their bodies to work for Black people to fight against police brutality. They are facing the police. They are facing arrests for protesting and stuff like that, while these Black power entertainers sit in the comfort of their home entertaining you with videos. So groups like that, like Black Lives Matter, understand the importance of solidarity with other oppressed people, including the Palestinian people. That's why they have spoken out in support of the people of Palestine. The other thing is this, Umar Johnson talks about the importance of what's going on in Africa. And I agree with that. I agree that, what happens in Africa is important, and we should be involved and concerned about the plight of our brothers and sisters throughout the African diaspora. I agree wholeheartedly with that point. But the same argument that he's raising about Palestinian people, people can make the same argument about what's going on in the continent. They could say the same thing. They could say, well, we have all this stuff happening in America. Why are you concerned about what's happening in Africa? They could make those same statements. And the truth of the matter is, I've seen videos where Dr. Umar Johnson talks about, certain things that are happening in Africa, but he talks about these things in passing. That is not his focus, despite what he said right here in this statement. That's not his focus by any stretch of the imagination. I see more videos of Dr. Umar Johnson talking about people, Black men being with quote unquote snow bunnies. I see more videos of him talking about the Will and Jada situation. I see more humorous, goofy videos of him joking around about those types of things and other things that are irrelevant, really, in the big scheme of things, to the real struggles that our people face. I see him more preoccupied with those things than he is about what's actually happening on the continent of Africa. And my question is, like, other than, these speaking engagements and, traveling around to speak to these different people around the world and stuff like that, what are you actually doing in terms of organizing? Why you express all this concern about Africa and stuff? But anyhow, those are just a few of my thoughts about this. And he talks about people being concerned about what's happening to Palestine, and they're not concerned about what's happening to Black people. Again, you can be concerned about both. You can be concerned about, what's happening on the continent while being concerned about what's happening in Gaza. And the fact of the matter is, there are some people that just don't know about what's happening on the continent because they're not informed. And, a lot of times, a lot of the information that we get is from mainstream corporate media that doesn't care or even mention what's happening on the continent. So a lot of people just simply don't know about African history. They don't know about African geopolitics. And we all should be concerned about what happens on the continent. But don't just write it off as if Black people are not concerned about, what happens to other Black people. It's not that simple. And for those who are knowledgeable about what's happening on the continent, they express concern while at the same time they express concern about what's happening in Palestine, just like Kwame Ture did. Kwame Ture spoke out boldly and courageously against, what's happening to the Palestinian people, while at the same time he spoke out boldly about African Americans, about our plight and about the plight of Africans throughout the world. That's a prime example of how we need to operate. So, those are a few of my thoughts. And, for more information about why this issue is relevant to African Americans, I encourage people to watch my video where I talk about that in great detail. I go into more detail about why this is an issue that should matter to African Americans. So those are my thoughts. I'm really interested in hearing from you. And lastly, I'll say this, I think a lot of times, what has happened is we don't really get a full picture. Just like I was saying about the corporate media not really showing us what happens on the continent of Africa as much. The corporate media doesn't show us the suffering of the Palestinian people. And that's why people are, like Dr. Umar Johnson, for instance, can brush off the suffering of the Palestinian people. Make it seem as if that's something that doesn't even matter. It's not that important. It doesn't matter. Again, I encourage y'all to watch my video where I talk about why this matters. But I don't understand how any human being with a conscience can be dismissive of what is happening in Gaza. When you see the images of all those Palestinian babies and children killed by the Israelis, when you see their bloody bodies lying in the streets, when you see the bodies of all these people, women and children and men lying in the streets, how could you not have compassion just as a human being? And one of the sad things, like I was saying before, the media doesn't show those images. The mainstream media doesn't show those images. But to see those images, I encourage